we have Manu Prasad.
Hello everyone, my name is Manu Prasad. In the 140 character world, I go by the handle of manuscripts. In the larger digital universe, my home is manuscripts.com. It's been for a while, 2003. Blogging was invented, incidentally, by Rediff, of all people. And it was hilarious at that point of time. I found a snap the other day, a screenshot of what my blog used to be, and I was really embarrassed. But that's the way we all start. So what I'm trying to do in the next 15 minutes is to answer 3 questions. Why I consider blogs influential in the brand context? What can brands do with blogs? And what can bloggers do to create a market for themselves? I guess from the audience, I am kind of guessing that the last part is the most interesting. Unfortunately, I don't have many slides on it, but we'll try to get by with what we can. Right, but first we'll talk about me. That's only because my life has seen a massive intersection of both blogs and brands. So I am basically a marketer by profession. Started my work life in brand with Worldspace, then moved on to mainstream media brands like Midday and several brands in the Times Group. Worked at Myntra as head of social, and then now I work at Group M, heading social media strategy for South. On the other side, the blog started, like I said, in 2003. And there I've been pretty much writing on anything that came to mind. That goes from restaurant reviews, book reviews, nice ones though. I don't really trash people there. If I can't write anything nice, I don't write. There are startup columns, there are my personal thoughts, philosophies on what the future should be, according to me. Nobody else is interested, I am though. Like Kavi said, it all needs to come from within. Would you write without an audience? You would. I think I would, and that's the way it goes for me. So, in the last few years, I have seen a lot of intersection of my worlds. It's actually my worlds colliding. So at Myntra, for example, we use blogs really extensively. At GroupM, I advise a lot of clients to consider blogging as part of their marketing strategy mix. On the other side, more interestingly, on how blogging has worked for me as a person, the restaurant reviews and the startup writing actually led me to get columns in mainstream publication. You would call it a tabloid, but it's Bangalore Mirror. So from there, I got a role as a mentor at the Microsoft Accelerator program. So I get to work with the coolest startups that are coming up from India. So all of these are opportunities that came by because of me blogging, and for a long time. So blogging basically has influenced my life a lot. So let's talk about influence of it. A lot of things and people influence us, from parents, family, tradition, sanskar, culture, values, to the schools that we went to, our schoolmates there, the teachers who taught us, to the media we consumed at an early age. At my age it was Doordarshan and probably a few newspapers and a few magazines I should not probably talk about here. The movies that I have seen, historical, inspirational figures, the searches that we do now in the current age, whether they are generic or specific, the advertisements that we see, probably the advertisements are the only thing that can interrupt what the nation needs to know. The real imaginary friends on Twitter, the fictional imaginary friends offline, to real friends and what they like on Facebook, even though that might be Justin Bieber, who himself might be under the influence of alcohol. So, Aloknath, alcohol, both begin with the same 2 letters, but are fundamentally 2 different influences in anyone's life, right? So, if that does not make you believe that influence is complex, this chart should. I can see the frown, so I'm not going to go in depth into the chart, right? It's a typical marketeer's PPT. Sorry about that. So, all I'm trying to show is that influence is a really complex thing. And I'm trying to define it in the context of brands and business. So here, influence is probably changing the way people think, behave, act, perceive things, and thereby convert that into some sort of consumption behavior. So how does all of this affect brands? If you look at it, the fundamentals of what we call influence have not really changed. You're still talking about reach, what mainstream media used to do for brands. You're talking about relevance, you're talking about resonance, and you're talking about relationship. But what has happened though, is that in an earlier era, brands could buy their way into reach. So probably you had very few media objects that you consumed, and your interactions with such a crowd of people was probably lesser. Therefore, the amount of influence that brands could have on a consumer mind, surely because of the reach factor, was very high. And therefore, they started affecting the other three parameters as well. But since then, media has kind of exploded, not just in terms of, let's say, traditional media channels, but also in the form of internet and social. So these days, I would say that, John Cage used this line for music. We live not in the mainstream, but in many streams. That actually holds true for personal lives as well. We have fundamentally different lives happening at the same time, in a consumption pattern context as well as in a behavior context. So some of us are bloggers, some of us are brand guys. All of these are different streams happening in our life. And pop culture, there is no such thing as pop culture these days. It's almost a mix of various kinds of things that you are interested in. And then came social. So when social came about and brands figured out that pretty much everyone was on Facebook or Twitter, they wanted their little say in it. So which means that they got on board and tried to collect as many likes and followers as they could in the shortest period of time. But what they forgot about this part was the conversations that were happening there. They did not want to involve themselves in conversation. I'm being very general here. There are some brands which have done a good job. I'm just being very general here. What they tried to do instead was to try to get onto every platform that existed and broadcast the same message that they would on a television channel or a print medium. So two things have happened to brands because of that. It's a kind of a double whammy. On one side, people have started talking back to brands. It's not something that they are used to. So not just can they ignore ads on social media, they can actually talk negative about a brand. On the other side, social businesses figured out that they had to eat as well, bring dinner to the table. And that meant that they had to have a revenue model in place. And that meant that they looked at traditional media for some sort of influence. And what they figured out was they could actually charge brands for reach, dollars for reach. So all of these painstakingly collected likes and followers by brands, which they thought was really being owned by them, was actually only being leased out by a social platform to them. So that pretty much sets up the stage for the hero that Gotham deserves. A hero that has not really gotten the attention or respect that it deserves. It is an owned media platform that goes by the name of blogs. Yeah, so this is also slightly boring from an audience context, but this is fundamentally what Lucky was talking about earlier, of why a brand should blog, if it should blog at all. Competitor blogging is not really a reason, nor is everyone is doing it. You need to figure out a business outcome that can be affected by blogging. And that could be many. I'll show you a few examples in a while. But once you figure out the business outcome, then you want to look at what kind of content strategy would go with that. That would also dictate the kind of form that you're using. Is that going to be text? Is that going to be video? Is that going to be photo? And if so, what kind of platform would you go after? WordPress, Tumblr, anything else out there? Your life as a brand outside and what you are wanting to speak on social will also dictate the kind of flavor that goes into your conversations. Are you going to be serious? Are you going to be conversational? Are you going to be casual? Are you going to be cheeky? You could have a ton of these. These can't really be different from what you are as a brand outside. You'll also need to figure out how frequently do you need to post to communicate your message best. FI is for refresh. Basically, none of this is a one-time thing. You need to look at your strategy on a regular basis, tweak it according to the kind of interest it's generating, and then probably rework the entire thing so that it communicates your message in a much better manner. A lot of things can be achieved through blogs, and that's a list of things that I have put out there. Something that has already been spoken about, so probably we'll skip that a little bit. It's not without challenges. Brands are really not used to creating or curating content in such large amounts. So like Lucky said, it's probably a very long drawn out exercise to make a television commercial or a print ad for marketing purposes, but it's a totally different ball game of actually creating a blog and populating it with content on, if not a daily basis, at least a weekly basis. But I can assure you that it can be done. So the best example that I can give here from personal experience again is from Mitra. He started the fashion blog in 2011, probably an early adopter from a blogging point of view for brands, at least in this country. What we tried to do there was a very simple thing. Tell stories of what people could do with fashion, apparel, accessories, etc. The fundamental agenda of the blog, from a content strategy point of view, was to help your consumers look good. And that is what we carried through across various formats. So we used text, we used images, we used videos with celebrities. What all of that has resulted in not just a business outcome that, that's barely for saying that consumers look good, but also from a revenue point of view. So the blog contributes revenue to Myntra.com as an e-com player. Because people like what they see on the blog, click through, go to Myntra, figure out that they can trust this brand because they know what they're talking about in fashion, and therefore buy more from Myntra. So a very clear business outcome, which was revenue, that came out of that blog. So blogs were quite a hit at Myntra, and therefore I was given permission to start one more blog a year later. This had a completely different business outcome in mind. This was a corporate blog which talked about the values and culture that went behind making an e-commerce brand. This could do with, so what we populated it was CSR initiatives, events that happened at office, thinking that went behind a product or a feature, things like that. So fundamentally the same weapon, so to speak, a blog, has been used for two different business outcomes and two different audiences. One for consumers and the other for a completely different set of stakeholders, which could be potential employees, which could be investors, which could be media, and so on and so forth. A few more examples of where I have seen brands doing a great job with blogs. So Boeing has its VP of marketing as the author of the blog. He basically jet sets around the globe in his Boeing jets, visits various factories, talks to a whole lot of vendors, generally has a great jet setting life. But what he does write about and share are a lot of photos which you might, any person interested in planes might not see in any other place. Because these are inside looks of factories, jets being made, and such stuff. IBM does a great job with something as probably boring as technology and innovation. It blogs on Tumblr and it uses GIFs for communicating this message of being a thought leader in that domain. Intuit is a fundamentally different target audience, small and medium businesses, but they share tips and success stories to get its community growing. Google blog, pretty much everyone is familiar with. The world follows it because a lot of announcements get made on the Google blog. Larry Page even does a guest post once in a while, and it's a pretty interesting blog because the kind of storytelling that they do, involves the consumer or the regular user of the internet quite a bit. They understand the internet really clearly, and that comes out through the blog. Starbucks is an example that I've taken because this is another brand that has used blogs for multiple things. It talks about coffee, it talks about coffee experiences, it talks about its brand, it talks about promotions, it talks about pretty much CSR initiatives, a whole lot of things under the ambit of one blog. The last example here is one close to home and probably close to heart as well, because this is one of my poster boys personally when I went into Myntra. That's ClearTrip. ClearTrip does a great job of taking consumers through the product journey, of talking about why it implements products and features, and thereby telling the consumer in an indirect way that they are front and center when ClearTrip takes the decision. Thing that I have seen with brands when they get into blogging is this entire SEO gaming jazz. And that's probably coming from a very clear marketing understanding of this thing. So what brands try to do is fill it with as many keywords as possible in the shortest time frame so that they get the traction that they want for the blog. But this is probably not doing justice to what a blog should be about, because it can do a whole lot of things that are much more in this, things that I shared earlier. So the second way in which brands can use blogs is to use influencers. So there was this little notion that probably blogs cannot be commercial. I'm a little bit out of tune with that, because I feel that if there is disclosure and if the blogger is having an iota of integrity, he will communicate that or she will communicate that, and so long as the audience who's reading it knows that this is probably a paid job and he's doing it after taking money, well, that influence will be delivered because of that or in spite of that. So how can you do that? At Myntra we used a lot of bloggers. Use is probably a long word. We had a wrong word, so we'll say we had a dialogue with a lot of bloggers. Over a longer time frame, we had regular blogger outreach programs happening with bloggers who used to write about fashion as well as cosmetics. We also had conversations with them on specific projects. This one, for example, is to do with Myntra's private label brands, what you call Myntra Originals. We never had a brand campaign for this. The entire campaigning for this was done on blogs, because we had bloggers create ensembles out of Myntra merchandise, put it up on their blog, and probably the stuff that they made was better than what the brand could have come up with. A few things to note when you're dealing with bloggers. One is to understand that they are not really one singular tribe or one stereotype. I'm probably preaching to the choir, but for any brand guys out there, yet So they need to be talked about as an individual. So this entire PR bombing exercise is not really a good way to go to blogs. Also understand the value that you are bringing, not just for yourself as a brand, but for the blogger and for the blogger's audience. This could be many things. It could be exclusive content, it could be money, it could be meeting with a celebrity, it could be giveaways for the crowd, a lot of things. So you need to have that flexibility to understand that different bloggers have different motivations, and therefore you need to deal with them differently. A sustained relationship over a longer time frame probably makes sense because you are not going to change your domain as a brand every 2 months. When you're looking at bloggers, one of the things to look at is reach, obviously, because it's a mainstream media training that you get, that you need to look at the amount of reach that a particular post or a particular blogger would get. But the thing to note here is also the affinity. What is the relationship the blogger has with the audience? Is that going to be of more influence than the reach that you're getting from other bloggers? The last thing is to figure out a measurement parameter for how you judge your blogger outreach program. Blogger outreach programs do not get done over a longer time frame because people really don't know what they're trying to get out of this. So sometimes they do not get the volume that they expect, and suddenly the entire thing goes off. So be consistent in your efforts, and it'll probably show you some results in a longer time frame. And this one slide is for bloggers, probably coming from my experience of blogging for, 11 years almost now. Have a purpose. It's exactly like what Kavi said. Would you still blog if you knew that nobody was reading you? I do, because I do it for a completely different purpose altogether. But in this context, let's bring it back to brands and business, so to speak. Have something that you can identify with, whether it is books, whether it is fashion, whether it is food, whether it is anything that you are interested in, so that you would be able to blog without somebody giving you an external motivation. Figure out the platform, what actually works best for you for visuals or videos or text. Plan in advance, because once you start blogging, it's like Lucky said, you really can't stop, even as a personal brand or an individual, because you're setting expectations for an audience. And once that happens, and once you start setting expectations and you don't meet them, then it goes downhill from there. Produce your content well. Spend time on packaging your content. Do not just randomly put things out there like Facebook and expect 200 likes happening out of it. There are a lot of guys out there, and that's probably my next point also. There are so many bloggers out there. You need to figure out that you need to catch brands' attention. You need to work at it and be seen at the right places, comment, Twitter, Facebook, wherever, but promote your content if you feel that it deserves promoting. And lastly, if you see something that you can be part of, whether it's a brand campaign or a brand itself in a longer time frame, don't be hesitant to pitch to brands. Because if you can bring value to the table, either through your reach or your influence, brands will only be too happy because they have no idea what is going on. A few successful stories of how people have created business models out of their blogging. Hugh MacLeod is somebody who I follow regularly. He has really great art prints that are going out, but all of his thinking actually happens. You can see it happen on the blog in the form of posts. Seth Godin, another famous personality in marketing, writer of several bestseller books. Again, all of his thinking involves his community. He actually calls them a tribe, and he shares everything with them from a thinking point of view. Amit is here, so he's going to talk about himself after a while. I didn't know he was going to be here. Lastly, Naina, who uses, Kavi was talking about storytelling and photography. She's probably one great example of how brands have used photographic storytelling in their entire brand journey. So the sum root of all of it all, it looks complex, but it's basically how humanity has evolved over a period of time and the kind of business relationships and currencies that have come up. We are now in probably what you can call the relationships era. What the Clue Train Manifesto says is relationship before conversation, before transaction. So it's not as though social media platforms like a Facebook or Twitter cannot do it for you, but there's something about an owned platform which gives you the flexibility to do the things that you really want to do and connect with your consumers. So if you go at it with diligence and if you go at it with full disclosure and integrity, in the immortal words of Michael Scott, there is no way that you cannot but win, win, win.